going same power like a Mason. Dream come true, gotta chase. If you lost something, embrace. The bond we shake can't break it. I'ma give you my heart, don't break it.
The sound of laughter filled the kitchen that night, but within seconds it was replaced by screams that no one on the other end of the phone could ever forget. On a glowing FaceTime screen, 3 young women watched in real time as their best friend froze mid-sentence. Behind her, a shadow moved, a boy they all knew, a boy who once slipped a ring onto her finger in front of family and friends, stepped into the room. Only this time, instead of a velvet box, he carried a gun. The glint of metal caught the light, and then the first shot shattered the moment. She fell to the floor, her body folding in on itself. Her friends screamed her name, helpless, their voices echoing into a void. The phone did not disconnect. The audio kept streaming, capturing the sound of bullets, the sound of a young life slipping away. This was not random. It was not sudden. It was a tragedy scripted long before that night, written in warning signs no one could bring themselves to read. Because less than a week earlier, that same boy had fallen to one knee, tears in his eyes, holding out a promise of forever. She had covered her mouth with trembling hands, crying as she whispered, "Yes." Everyone cheered, capturing the moment on their phones. The proposal looked like love, looked like a beginning, but it wasn't. It was a countdown. Her name was Kelly McRae. She had been her father's shadow since birth, named after him, Kelvin, with just a single letter softened. He called her his girl, his baby, the light of his life. They were inseparable, caught in the kind of bond that can be seen in every photo and home video. Their inside jokes, their matching smiles, the quiet understanding that no matter what, they belong to each other. At 18 years old, Kaylee was stepping into her future. She was the boldest of 5, a girl who knew what she wanted and had already begun to build it. Her hair business, Creative Styles, was more than a name. It was her identity, her independence, her future. She was a model, a cosmetologist, a girl in purple, the color that seemed to follow her like an aura. She was loved by everyone she met. She was only just beginning. And then came Kazon Shaw. He was 19 when he walked into her life. A high school romance that bloomed into something more serious. On the surface, he looked like the dream, attentive, present, loyal. To her family and friends, he appeared devoted. But behind that image was a boy without roots, without stability, without a foundation to stand on. He was a drifter, and Kelly became his anchor. The one solid thing in a chaotic life. To him, she was not just a girlfriend, she was survival. When Keely realized the relationship was unhealthy, when she tried to pull away, Kazon could not let her go. In his mind, losing her was unthinkable, impossible. Her friends would later share the words he lived by. "If you're not with me, you're with nobody." It wasn't love. It was possession. It was threat, disguised as devotion. Kelly broke up with him. But Kazon had nowhere to go. Out of kindness, fatal, costly kindness, she let him stay. Imagine that. Your ex-boyfriend, the one you've broken up with because he scares you, still sleeping under your roof, still walking through your kitchen, still watching you as though you belonged to him. Compassion became captivity, and Kelly's home, her safe place, turned into her cage. Her friends saw the danger clearly. They begged her to run, begged her to throw him out. One of them asked, was he serious? Was he really threatening her? Or was he just trying to scare her? Kaylee's reply was ice cold. He's dead ass. He's too hurt to laugh. Her friend didn't hesitate. We're not going to wait for him to kill you. He will. Not maybe. He will. But Kaylee only replied with one small word. Okay. By March of 2024, the warnings had become reality. Kayson snapped. He wrapped his hands around her throat, strangling her until the world narrowed to nothing. He pressed a gun against her head and demanded money. But Kelly fought. She broke free, sprinted to her car, breath ragged, heart racing. She thought she had escaped. She hadn't. Kayson hurled his entire body onto her windshield, pounding the glass with his fists, screaming. The glass cracked, the car shook, and still she pressed harder on the gas until she reached a park. Shaking, terrified, she called 911. The officers came. She pointed across the lot. That's him. Right there in that car. They saw him. They approached. He ran. The chase began, sirens slicing through the night. They had him in their sights. They knew his face, his name, his crime. And then, suddenly, they stopped. For reasons never fully explained, they let him go. The system had its first chance to save her. It failed. No safe house. No hotel. No officer parked outside her home. No warning to leave. No protection at all. They sent her back to the very place he knew best. The house where he had a key. The house where he had once belonged. Less than 24 hours later, she was gone. That night she tried to pretend everything was normal. She FaceTimed her friends, laughed, cooked dinner. Earlier, she had even bought her father a meal, saving the receipt with a note. Dinner on me, father. Even in fear, even with the clock ticking, she was still thinking of others. Still caring, still giving. At 9 o'clock, Kayson opened the door. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. In his mind, this was still his home. He walked into the kitchen as though nothing had changed except this time he was holding a gun. Her friends saw him first on the FaceTime screen. They saw the weapon. They screamed. The first shot tore through her back. She fell, crying out in pain. He kept firing. Head, neck, back. The sound of bullets echoed through the phone, while her friends, powerless, begged, screamed, wept. Then came the final sound. Kayson turning the gun on himself. By the time her mother rushed to the room, dialing 911 with trembling fingers, Kaylee lay bleeding on the floor. She was rushed to the hospital but never made it out alive. She was 18 years old. The boy who once held a velvet box and promised forever was 19, slumped against a wall with a self-inflicted wound, dying in the same hospital bed where he was supposed to face trial. The proposal had never been the beginning. It had been the beginning of the end, a countdown disguised as a fairy tale. And the question that lingers is not whether Kaylee's death could have been prevented. It could have. The question is, how many warnings does it take before a life matters enough to act? The sirens faded, the flashing lights went dark, and suddenly the house was just a house again. But inside, everything had changed. 18-year-old Kelly McRae was gone, her body lying still in a hospital bed. The girl who had spent her life bringing light into every room had been silenced by the very person she once let in. 19-year-old Kazan Shaw, the boy who had sworn to love her, clung to life only for a few hours longer. By morning, he was gone too. No trial, no explanations, no answers, just silence. In the days that followed, grief seeped into every corner of her family's life. Her father, Kelvin, the man she had been named after, found himself staring at the empty spaces where she used to stand. The house was too quiet, the laughter gone. He searched for anything to hold on to, any small piece of her he could keep. And then he found it. A receipt from the night she died. On it were the words she had written, "Dinner on me, Father." A simple note, a routine act of love, but for him, it became something sacred. He clutched it like a message from beyond, saying she was still caring for him even in death. Later, he would write that the receipt made him smile so hard it almost brought joy through his tears. It was the kind of comfort only a father who had lost his baby girl could understand. 9 days after her murder, hundreds of people gathered on Singer Island Beach. If you had looked across the sand that day, all you would have seen was purple. Purple balloons, purple flowers, purple shirts. A sea of color for the girl who had made it her own. The waves crashed against the shore as her friends and family stood in silence, holding one another, searching for words that didn't exist. Her father stood before them all, fighting back tears, voice breaking under the weight of a grief too heavy to carry. He tried to speak, but sometimes grief is beyond language. Sometimes all a parent can do is stand in front of the world and let the silence speak for him. But Kelly's mother, Marla, had words, and her words were filled with fury. She told the crowd what she could not stop thinking, that her daughter had called for help, that the police had chased him, that they had him in their sights and then they let him go. She called the wrong number, she said bitterly. If she had called a different department, if she had reached the sheriff instead of the city, maybe, just maybe, she would still be alive. Instead, West Palm Beach police had turned away from her at the moment she needed them most. Her family was not content to grieve in silence. They hired attorneys, filed notice of a lawsuit, and laid out their claim in devastating simplicity. The police failed to protect her. They had every reason to know she was in danger. They had the man's name, his face, his car, his threats. They had her statement, her 911 call, her bruises, her fear, and yet they did nothing. They did not arrest him. They did not offer her protection. They did not even suggest she stay somewhere else. They sent her back into the house where he had strangled her only hours earlier. The same house where he still had a key. Her attorney, Nick Johnson, put it plainly. They didn't offer to relocate her. They didn't take her to a safe house. They didn't put her somewhere undisclosed, away from someone they knew could come back. And the very next day, he did. The question hung in the air like smoke. Why was the chase called off? Police pursue suspects every single day for crimes far less serious. High-speed chases for stolen cars, for traffic violations, for drug possession. Yet here was a man who had just strangled an 18-year-old girl and pressed a gun to her head. And they stopped. He eluded us, the spokesman would later admit. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that they let him go. Even more haunting was what came after. At no point did they offer Keely a safe place. No patrol car stationed outside her home. No shelter. No relocation. Not even the suggestion that she shouldn't go back. And so she went back. Because what else was she supposed to do? Where else was she supposed to go? Less than 24 hours later, she was dead. Her story became more than just one family's nightmare. It became the story of every woman who has ever called 911 only to be told, "We'll look for him." Every survivor who has been asked to go back home and wait. Every person who has been promised protection that never comes. Kaylee was one name, one face, one young woman whose life was cut short, but behind her are countless others still alive, still waiting, still hoping they will not become the next headline. Her mother's plea was not for vengeance. It was for change. She said simply, "I don't want another Kaylee McRae." But how many are there right now? Locked in houses with men who won't let them go. Dialing numbers that connect them to systems that will not save them. Kaylee had been building a future. She had dreams. She had plans. She had warnings written in plain words. "He will kill you." And yet, no one stopped it. Not her friends, who could only watch. Not the police, who turned away. Not the system, which never gave her a way out. In the end, her life became a question, one that lingers long after the bullets stopped. How many warnings does it take before someone matters enough to save? And that is why we remember her, not just as a victim, not just as a name in a headline, but as a daughter who loved her father, as a young woman who built a business from nothing, as a girl whose favorite color was purple, and above all, as proof of a truth that is too painful to ignore. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you don't. And sometimes the system doesn't just fail. It abandons you. If someone ever tells you, "If I can't have you, nobody can," believe them. That is not love. That is a threat. And if you are in danger, don't wait for the system to save you. Run. Get out. Because Keely's story shows us what happens when help comes too late. There is more to uncover the unanswered questions, the fight her family has waged for justice, and the haunting reality of how preventable her death truly was. If you don't want to miss the next part, don't forget to subscribe, because the deeper we go into this case, the more unbearable the truth becomes. The beach vigil had ended, the purple balloons had floated into the sky, and the crowd slowly drifted back to their own lives. But for Kaylee's family, there was no returning. They lived in a world split into two parts, the one where Kelly was alive, and the one that came after. Every morning her father woke up, expecting to hear her footsteps, to hear her voice calling for him, and every morning he was met with silence. For her mother, it was different but no less cruel. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear the gunfire that had echoed through her home. For both parents, grief had fused with something heavier: fury. They believed one thing above all else: Keely's death didn't have to happen. And they were right. Because the system had warning after warning, and still, it looked away. So her parents made a decision. They would not let her story fade into just another obituary. They would take the fight to the very institutions that failed her. They would demand answers, even if none were willingly given. Their lawyers began to piece together the case, each fact more damning than the last. The police had Kaylee's statement. They had seen the bruises on her neck. They knew he had a gun. They knew he had threatened her life. They had chased him, sirens screaming into the night, until they were close enough to end it right then and there. And then they stopped. Just stopped. No arrest, no warning to Keely, no safe place offered, no patrol car parked outside her door. Nothing. Instead, they let her walk back into the very house where she had been attacked. They left her unprotected with a man who had already promised, "If you're not with me, you're with nobody." When attorney Nick Johnson spoke to the press, his words landed like stones. They didn't relocate her. They didn't protect her. They didn't even suggest she stay somewhere else. They sent her home, and the next day, she was dead. The family filed notice of a lawsuit, alleging what seemed clear: gross negligence. Their daughter had been abandoned by the very people sworn to protect her. But the lawsuit wasn't just about accountability. It was about forcing the system to confront its own failures. Failures that stretched far beyond one girl, one family, one night in March. Because what happened to Keely was not unique. It was the story of countless women across the country who called for help and were sent home to wait for their abusers to strike again. Domestic violence is one of the most predictable forms of homicide. Experts say the signs are almost always there. The escalation of threats, the strangling, the insistence that, if I can't have you, nobody can. Strangulation itself is one of the strongest predictors of homicide. Studies show that women who survive being strangled by a partner are 7 times more likely to be killed by that partner later. 7 times. And still, time and time again, police treat it as just another domestic dispute, just another fight that will blow over. Kaylee's story was the proof of what happens when those warnings are ignored. Her friends had spelled it out in text messages. He will kill you. Not maybe, not possibly, he will. They had called it. They had begged her to run, but the truth is, she should not have had to run. She should have been protected. The responsibility should not have rested on the shoulders of an 18-year-old girl too kind to throw someone out on the street. The anger in the community grew. People asked the same questions her parents were asking. Why was the chase called off? Why wasn't she taken somewhere safe? Why was she left in the house where he still had a key? Why did the system shrug at warning after warning until it was too late? These questions echoed through the town halls, through online forums, through vigils lit by candlelight. But the answers never came. Instead, there was silence. A police spokesman admitted only this: "We knew what car he was in. We knew who we were looking for, but he eluded us." That word eluded became a wound, because it wasn't true. He hadn't eluded them. They had let him go. They had chosen to call off the chase. And that choice had a body count. Kaylee's mother said it best. She called the wrong number. One city department answered when another might have acted. One agency took the call while another might have responded differently. And in the gap between one phone line and another, a young girl's life ended. The lawsuit was never going to bring her back, but it was meant to force accountability, to put on record that the system failed, because to her parents, the worst tragedy of all would be if nothing changed, if their daughter's death became just another statistic in the endless line of domestic violence cases that end the same way. Kaylee's story was no longer just about a girl and a boy. A proposal turned into an execution. It was about every woman sitting in her kitchen right now, staring at the front door, wondering if tonight is the night he comes back. It was about every survivor who has ever whispered into a phone, "He's going to kill me," only to be told to wait. And maybe that's why her story resonated so deeply. Because in Keely's face, people saw their daughters, their sisters, their friends. They saw what it meant when kindness is punished, when compassion is exploited, when the system fails. They saw themselves. In the weeks after her death, her father went back to her YouTube channel, where he had once uploaded silly family clips, where Keely herself had smiled into the camera, vibrant and alive. Now he uploaded a different kind of video. One of him standing on the beach, voice breaking, telling the world that his daughter was gone. The kind of grief that should never be filmed, but it was the only way he knew to keep her memory alive. Because if the world forgets, then she dies twice, and so her family continues. They fight lawsuits, they hold vigils, they wear purple. They tell her story again and again, not because they want to, but because they must. Because every time they say her name, every time they remind the world who she was, they are keeping her alive. The truth is unbearable. Kaylee McRae could have been saved. She should have been saved. But she wasn't. And that leaves one question hanging in the air like a ghost. How many more Kayleys will there be before the system learns to listen? To understand what happened in that kitchen, you have to understand what was happening in his head. Because from the outside, the story looked simple. Boy meets girl. Boy falls in love. Boy can't let go. But love was never what Kason Shaw carried inside him. Love doesn't strangle. Love doesn't press a gun against the head of the person it claims to cherish. Love doesn't whisper, "If you're not mine, you're nobody's." What Kason felt was not love. It was possession. And possession is always hungry. From the very beginning, there were cracks in the picture he painted of himself. He was young, yes, 19, but already drifting, without the kind of stability that anchors someone to reality. No home of his own, no family to guide him. He clung to Keely because she was the only constant in his life. To him, she wasn't just a girlfriend. She was his shelter, his future, his only definition of belonging. And when she tried to end it, when she told him the relationship had become unhealthy, it wasn't just heartbreak he felt, it was erasure. If she walked away, he was nothing. That's why the proposal had never been about forever. It wasn't about building a life. It was about control. A public declaration in front of family and friends, her yes filmed, her tears recorded, was a binding act in his mind. Not a promise, but a contract. She said yes once. To him, that meant she could never say no. Her friends saw it clearly. They saw the danger in his stare, the way he watched her, the way he interpreted every attempt at distance as betrayal. They asked her, was he serious? Was he really threatening her? And she answered with words that still cut like glass. He's dead ass. He's too hurt to laugh. That wasn't the voice of a girl in love. That was the voice of a girl who knew exactly how dangerous he was, but couldn't yet grasp the inevitability of what was coming. Psychologists have a name for it: coercive control. It's when one partner doesn't just want love but wants ownership, wants to monitor, dictate, dominate, and when ownership feels threatened, the outcome is predictable. Strangulation is one of the biggest red flags. A flashing siren that a homicide is likely to follow. Studies show it increases the risk by 7 times. 7. And Kaylee told police he had strangled her. She survived the first time. The second time, she didn't. But what made this case so haunting was how clearly everyone could see it coming, except the people who could have stopped it. Her friends spelled it out in plain text. One of them wrote, "We're not going to wait for him to kill you. He will." And Kelly's answer? Just one word. "Okay, Not defiance, not panic, just resignation. Like she knew that even if she wanted to run, even if she wanted to throw him out, her kindness wouldn't let her. She couldn't put him on the street. She couldn't abandon him the way he feared abandonment, and that kindness became the lock that kept her trapped. In the weeks before the murder, she carried the weight of two truths. On one side was her compassion, the girl who couldn't stop caring, who still bought her father dinner the night before she died. On the other side was his obsession, the boy who couldn't stop needing, who turned desperation into violence. And when those two collided, kindness didn't stand a chance. Because to Kason, if Kaylee left, it meant he ceased to exist. If she wasn't his, then she wasn't allowed to be anyone's. That's why he still held a key to her house. That's why he walked in like he belonged there. That's why the first shot went into her back. Not a warning, not a chance to turn around, but a statement. You're not leaving me. This is where obsession disguises itself as love. People hear the words, "I can't live without you. I'll die if you leave me," and sometimes mistake them for devotion. But what they are is a threat, a warning that the person speaking them has already decided. If they lose you, they will destroy you. It's not romance. It's a death sentence. And Kaylee's friends knew it. They told her as much. They begged her to run. They said it plain. But Kaylee was only 18. Too young to imagine that someone she once trusted could actually end her life. Too kind to slam the door on someone with nowhere to go. Too hopeful to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't really do it. And that is the cruelest part of this story. Because the system didn't just fail her once. It failed her at the precise moment she gave it everything it needed. She called 911. She pointed him out. She said, "That's him." And still, they let him go. In his head, that night sealed the outcome. He had strangled her, pointed a gun, been chased by police, and walked away. No handcuffs, no jail, no barriers. The message was clear. He was untouchable. If the police weren't going to stop him, no one was. And the next day, the cycle completed itself. He walked into the kitchen where she was cooking dinner, where her friends were laughing with her on FaceTime, and carried out the ending he had already decided on. The illusion of love shattered. Possession took its final form. It's easy, after the fact, to ask why. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she change the locks? Why didn't she go to a shelter? But the truth is crueler. It should never have been her responsibility to save herself. She was a teenager, barely 18, carrying the weight of someone else's violence and the blind eye of a system that should have stepped in. In the end, what killed Kaylee wasn't just Kazon's obsession. It was a chain of failures, his instability, her compassion, her friends' warnings, the police inaction, all converging into one night of horror, and that's why her story matters. Because obsession disguised as love is everywhere. Because too many girls hear the words, "If I can't have you, nobody can," and think it's passion instead of possession. Because too many systems are still shrugging at the warnings, still turning away, still saying, "He eluded us," when the truth is that they let him go. And so we return to the question that keeps haunting this case. How many warnings does it take before someone acts? How many receipts? How many bruises? How many desperate text messages need to exist before a girl's life is valued enough to save? The mind of a killer is not complicated. It is not mysterious. It is as simple and as terrifying as this. If I can't have you, no one can. And Kelly's story proves it's not just a phrase, it's a promise. The lawsuit pressed on, the vigils continued, the questions grew louder. But the answers were still missing. And the weight of what had been lost, the girl in purple, the father's shadow, the daughter who said, "Dinner on me, Father," remained unbearable. But this story isn't over yet. There's still the fight for accountability, the public reckoning, and the voices of those who refused to let Kelly's death vanish into silence. The funeral flowers had withered. The purple balloons had drifted into the horizon. But the grief in Kelly's family did not fade. It hardened. It turned into something sharp. Her parents carried it like a blade, not to cut themselves, but to cut through the silence that followed her death. Because for them, the greatest insult wasn't just that their daughter had been murdered, it was that she had asked for help and been ignored. Her father, Kelvin, clung to the receipt she left behind. Her final act of love. "Dinner on me, Father." He folded it into his wallet like scripture, a reminder that even at the very end, she was still thinking of him. Her mother, Marla, carried something else entirely. She carried rage, the kind of rage only a mother can know, the rage of watching your child vanish not because she was reckless, not because she didn't ask for help, but because the system that promised to protect her simply didn't care enough to act. The lawsuit was never about money. It was about accountability. Their attorneys laid it out in plain language. The police had everything they needed to stop Kason Shaw. They had Keely's 911 call. They had her testimony. They saw the bruises on her neck. They knew he had a gun. They chased him and let him go. And then, most damning of all, they sent her home to the same place he had attacked her, the same place he still had a key to. The case was a scarlet letter for the West Palm Beach Police Department. Attorney Nick Johnson described it as a catastrophic failure at every level. He explained that Kelly should have been relocated immediately, taken to a safe house, hidden away in a place where Kason could not find her. Instead, she was left exposed. A target. A girl who had been told, in every possible way, that her safety didn't matter enough to fight for. The family's anger spilled into the public. Vigils became protests. Town halls filled with questions that had no answers. Why was the chase called off? Why was there no arrest? Why wasn't she moved somewhere safe? Why was her life treated as disposable until it was gone? The questions grew louder each week, amplified by neighbors, friends, strangers online who saw in Keely the faces of their own daughters, their own sisters. The police offered little. Their spokesman, Mike Jockless, admitted only this: "We knew who we were looking for. We knew what car he was in. But he eluded us." Those words cut through the community like a wound, because it wasn't true. He hadn't eluded them. They had chosen to let him go. They had pulled back when they could have pressed forward. And in that decision, an 18-year-old girl's life was erased. For Kelly's family, the lawsuit was a weapon, not against one man, but against a system that had been failing women for decades. Because Kelly's case wasn't unique, domestic violence survivors across the country had told the same story. Police dismissing strangulation as just a fight, ignoring threats that were actually death sentences, sending women back into homes with the men who wanted to kill them. Her story became a mirror. People saw their own nightmares reflected in it. They thought of the times they had called for help and been told to wait. They thought of the nights they had slept with one ear open, listening for footsteps on the porch. They thought of the words they had heard from men who swore, "If I can't have you, nobody can." Keely's family didn't want sympathy. They wanted change. Her mother's plea was simple, almost unbearably so. "I don't want another Keely." She said it again and again, as though repeating it might prevent the next name from being written into the headlines. But everyone knew the truth. Keely wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Still, her parents refused to let her story vanish. They wore purple, her favorite color. They spoke her name at every gathering. They showed her graduation pictures, her smile, her business logo. Creative styles, reminding the world that she had been building something, that she had been more than a victim. They made sure that when people thought of Kelly, they thought of a young woman with dreams, not just a girl defined by the way she died. The fight for justice stretched beyond the courtroom. It became a campaign, a movement. Advocates demanded reforms, mandatory arrests in strangulation cases, guaranteed relocation for survivors of violent threats, accountability for departments that call off chases when lives are at stake. Keely's name became a rallying cry, proof that the system wasn't just flawed, it was lethal. Her father wrote late at night in his journal that the tragedy wasn't only that she died. "We all must go the way Keely went," he wrote. "The tragedy is in how she died, and how young she was when she died." Those words captured the heart of the fight. She had been robbed not only of her life but of the years she hadn't yet lived, the children she never got to raise, the clients she never got to style, the birthdays her family would celebrate without her. And so the lawsuit pressed on. Each filing, each court date, each statement was another attempt to hold anyone accountable for the fact that Keely had been abandoned. Her family knew it wouldn't bring her back. But maybe, just maybe, it could save the next girl. The public outcry did something rare. It broke through the noise. National outlets began to pick up the story. Commentators debated not just the details of Keely's case but the larger failure it revealed. And through it all, her family kept speaking, kept showing up, kept wearing purple. Because they understood what few families do until it's too late. If the world forgets, she dies twice. That was the fight now, not just for accountability, not just for justice, but for memory. To make sure Keely's name didn't fade into a statistic, to make sure her story forced change, to make sure her death wasn't in vain. But beneath the lawsuits, the protests, and the public outrage, one truth remained. The system had already shown what it was willing to do. Nothing. And that's what makes the next part of this story so unbearable. Because as the family fought in her name, the world had to face a question it had been avoiding for years. How many more daughters, sisters, mothers have to die before the system listens? March 15th, 2024. 9 days after the shots rang out in Kelly's kitchen, the ocean carried her name. Singer Island Beach was washed in purple, her favorite color. Balloons swayed in the wind, flowers rested in the sand. Shirts, candles, and ribbons all carried the same shade, like the tide itself had chosen to honor her. Hundreds gathered, holding one another, speaking softly, or not speaking at all. The waves crashed endlessly, as though they knew what words could not carry. She should still be here. At the front of that sea of purple stood her father, Kelvin, the man she had been named after, the man who had called her his shadow. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the weight of grief too heavy to bear. On his YouTube channel later, he would post a video of himself crying, struggling to find language for something that has no words. In the middle of it, he shared a moment that gave him comfort. He had found a receipt from the night she died, proof of the dinner she had bought him, her final act of love. He held it in his hands and said he could almost hear her voice again. "Dinner on me, Father." Even in death, she was still taking care of him. But not everyone at that vigil was there to mourn in silence. Her mother, Marla, stood with fire in her voice. She was angry. She demanded answers. She said plainly that her daughter had called the wrong number, that if she had reached the sheriff's office instead of the city police, she might still be alive. West Palm Beach didn't help her, she told the crowd, and the crowd knew she was right. That was the cruelest part of all. Kaylee had done everything right. She called 911. She pointed out her abuser. She begged for help. And still, the system shrugged. Still, the chase was called off. Still, she was sent home. And less than 24 hours later, she was dead. The lawsuit pressed forward, her family vowing that they would not let her name disappear. Their claim was devastating in its simplicity. The police had failed to protect her when they had every chance to do so. They had not offered to relocate her. They had not stationed a car outside her home. They had not even suggested she stay with family. Instead, they told her to go back to the very house her abuser still had a key to, a house that became her coffin. And so the questions hung in the air like ghosts. Why was the chase called off? Police pursue suspects for far less every day. High-speed chases unfold across the country for traffic violations, for stolen cars, for crimes that don't even involve a gun. But here, with a teenager's life hanging in the balance, they pulled back. Why? Why wasn't she relocated to safety? Why wasn't she offered protection? Why was she left alone? Defenseless. After reporting that the man she lived with had just strangled her and threatened her with a gun. Why was her life worth so little? No one answered. Not really. A spokesman admitted only that they knew who they were looking for, but that he eluded us. But the truth was clear. He hadn't eluded them. They had let him go. Kaylee's death became more than one family's nightmare. It became a symbol of every failure stitched into the fabric of how society handles domestic violence. Every woman who calls 911 and gets told to wait. Every survivor who whispers into the phone, "He's going to kill me," only to be sent home to face him again. Every daughter who is told the system will protect her, only to discover it won't. Kaylee had dreams, a business she was building, a future she could see unfolding. She had friends who loved her, friends who wrote in plain words that they feared what was coming. "He will kill you." They saw the truth. They said it out loud. And still, nothing stopped it. The tragedy wasn't just that she died. The tragedy was how she died shot in her own kitchen, with friends screaming through their phones, and a mother only a room away. The tragedy was how young she was when it happened. The tragedy was how predictable it had been, how many warnings had been ignored, how many chances there had been to save her. And that's what makes this story so unbearable. Because Kaylee's name isn't the only one. Behind her are countless others, silenced in the same way, abandoned in the same way. How many daughters, sisters, and mothers are out there tonight, waiting for the system to protect them, not knowing it won't? At her vigil, her mother begged the crowd, "I don't want another Kelly McRae." But the question that lingers is haunting. How many more will there be? This story leaves us with a truth we cannot ignore. If someone in your life ever says, "If I can't have you, nobody can," believe them. That is not love. That is a threat. If someone strangles you, know that the risk of being killed skyrockets. And if you call for help, don't wait for the system to save you. Run. Get out. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you won't. Keely McRae deserved more. She deserved to grow old. She deserved to build her business. To watch her father smile when she said, "Dinner on me." She deserved to be remembered for her laughter, not for her death. But now her story forces us to see the truth. The system failed her. And unless something changes, it will keep failing others. So remember her name. Remember her smile. Remember the girl in purple who lit up every room. Because she deserved better. And as we close her story, we leave you with the same question her family still asks. How many warnings does it take before a life matters enough to save? If you believe stories like this must be told, don't forget to subscribe. Because Keely's story may have ended, but the fight to keep her memory alive has only just begun.